Okay, this time I'm going to talk about not a comfortable subject to talk about, but necessary in my opinion, because it seems taboo and in many societies it is, which is sexuality, right? So different people have different sexualities, and that's not uh, something new, right? Although there's a tendency of groups of people, the hive, to lean towards a certain sexuality and convert that into a standard. Throughout history, different lines of thought have pervaded in different places. And to be frank with you, different types of behaviors and types of traditions lead to very different societies. Extreme examples are, Sodom and Gomorrah of the Bible, which were constantly engaged in sodomy, and therefore God, whatever that may be, nature or some sort of luck, punished them by burning their houses. Now, there are a lot of theories and there are a lot of historians that interpret that as, they were simply careless or the place was too crowded and it took fires very easily, so it was difficult to extinguish such fires, etc. But the thing is, there was an explicit type of denunciation of that behavior, and the god represented, the will and the way that the people thought, the people that wrote the Bible thought of sexuality, right? It was incorrect, therefore they must be punished. Now, contrast that with the puritanical period of England, for example, in which people, got married, had children, numerous children, and basically had no birth control, and had, no polygamy or promiscuity, at least in the public sight. So you have like this two competing sexualities in societies, and one opposes the other, and if the other is out of place, let's say a small group of polygamous people is inside a society that is mainly purportedly monogamous, will be discriminated and will be not taken care of, or at least ignored. So this is a little bit, will be shunned, right? This is a little bit like the story of almost any other group, if you really think about it. The Afro-Americans against the white people, or you could say the Southerners of the United States against the Northerners, which were pro-abolition of slave labor, and the Southerners, which were pro-slavery, because it was convenient for them to use the Afro-Americans. So it was they were conflicting ideologies. The same thing with poor and rich, right? This is explained by Karl Marx, who says that eventually the poor will get so exploited that will revolve against their leaders and their patrons to get better living conditions. And it's a constant battle for resources, mostly land. This continues even in 2016, when we are supposed to be more civilized and have better technologies and better language and more multiculturalism in place, but in reality, the ONU, the United Nations, United Nations hasn't really abolished war. They just use terms like war crimes, which is ludicrous, considering that war itself is a crime. But anyway, back to the subject matter. Slave trade, which has a lot to do with sexuality, because some of those slaves were sexual slaves. The porn industry, the underground porn industry uses still sexual slaves, which are not reported as sexual slaves. Obviously, they are reported as, actors or whatever. But some of them have been induced in a very early age. You have literally prostitution sites like, whorehouses. How do you call them? Oh God, I forgot the name. Anyway, a place where prostitutes sell their goods. Also may be affected by that. Now, I'm not saying the majority of it, but there's an ongoing investigation in at least first world countries about that issue. For example, the east coast of Africa near Madagascar, there's still a lot of trade, a lot of slave trade. Now, it could be for labor other than sexual slave, but that is still in place. So it hasn't been abolished absolutely in the world. In Brazil, there are many cases of slavery, all sorts of slavery. So, I know I started with polygamy against monogamy, but really the power that sexuality has, in which people are willing to oppose different views to the point of colliding and always fighting against each other, leads to a double standard, because some people live, the life that they show to the world and the life that they have privately, like in their houses or in perhaps secret societies. So it's different from other subject matters because it's more secretive, and they have the excuse that since it's a private thing, they don't have to disclose it because it's too private. So slave trade, polygamy, monogamy, all of that is how does it relate to each other? Well, apparently in the Bible, people could have in the old Israel, people could have a wife and slaves, and the slave could be pregnant, could become pregnant by the patron, and if the patron decided to, what to do with the son really, or the daughter, by really doing anything, even though it's an illegitimate child, it will still be decided what to do with. Generally, it continued. The child continued his or her legacy of slavery, being a slave of the patron or the family of the patron. So, how does this relate to relationships? In reality, every relationship, more or less, is given freely. So, in other words, there is consent. But in this case, in the sense of sexual slavery, it's not. There's no consent. So where's the line? When do you have? Where do you draw the line? And this happens a lot in morality in general. Like, when does it become legal to say that something is accepted by society, and when it isn't? And again, this is very highly dependent on societies themselves. For example, I don't remember the name of the tribe, but there was a tribe in New Guinea that condones innocent tradition to be a pedophile. Males, engage in sexual activities with boys. Now, there's no United Nations or Amnesty International study about it, or at least that I know, there's no Western institution that is trying to stop that, because it has been considered something tribal and something that is unique to that tribe. So they don't want to disturb them. Now, is it normal? Well, to them it is. Just like in many tribes, polygamy is the norm. And so you see a huge variety of things, and I haven't even talked about promiscuity, but I'll talk about that in another video, in which you see like there really is social sexual variety that happens in many contexts, and the standard of monogamy and having a child or children, or many children, perhaps by today's standards, too many children is a luxury that not many people can have, but they still engage in social monogamy. But again, they have perhaps some people have a second life that is not shown to the public, where they engage in extramarital sexual activity. Well, I'll leave it at here. I'll talk more about it, but I can't do a video. I can't enlarge the video to a huge amount, because it would not be seen by many people. Anyways, very few people watch me anyway. So I guess you're curious about how this ends. Stay tuned in this channel. I will talk about this more often. Thanks for listening.